Hey guys, I'm M.A.D.D.Y. I don't know, but today we are back with Go, my favorite sports team, and I actually forgot something. Alexa, turn on the overhead light red.
Okay.
We have to have our mood lighting. Anyway, I'm recording this on my computer, not my computer, my tablet. I had it right for the first time because I got to do some stuff on my phone and on my computer at the same time, and then we'll get into Jedi Survivor and just completing it. Last time, we, talked to Boba. He's cool. He's still there, by the way. I saw him. I played this a little bit earlier. And he's still there, just being cool. I took a picture of him, and I will try to get that picture off of my PS4 and just try to show it to you guys because I thought it looks pretty cool. Anyway, but yeah, today's episode, I actually don't know what it's called. Let me look. The Whys of Climbing and Literally Everything, featuring Alex Honnold. And I think that's the guy who has one leg, who likes who likes to rock climb solo with like no like harness or anything, which is insane. That's crazy to do, and I'm just excited to see. But if you guys want to support me everywhere I do, I'm doing Secret Evasions only on Patreon now until something like big and whatever big thing happens, because I'm honestly getting bored of Secret Invasions after today's episode, or yesterday's episode, I should say. But with that being said, let's just stop the chit chat and see what Mr. Alex has in store for us.
Hello, elegant listeners, and welcome to Go, My Favorite Sports Team. Today, we have another special guest. But before we get into that, I'm Tyler Scheid. I'm the master of sports, the master of balls and holes, and I'm joined with my co-host, Markiplier, who knows sports a lot less.
This is the third time in front of a guest he's just said that title, and he doesn't seem embarrassed about it. It's an inside joke that I don't even know where it started, but he just took it to himself. One of our fans called him the master of balls and holes, and he's really embraced it. So don't mind him. He doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. I'm Mark. I don't know sports, but the funny thing is, our guest today, Tyler and I both know a little bit about this ourselves. Tyler more than I. I don't climb outside. I climb inside in bouldering gyms where there's nice cushy paddings. Tyler's the one that goes outside on actual rocks and does. Tyler, you've done a little bit of free soloing yourself, right?
Yes, I have. Two of the flat irons in Boulder, Colorado, I've free soloed. I actually have plans to finish out all of them with my brother here. Hopefully, we'll do another one this year and hopefully finish it out within the next couple of years.
So this is what blows my mind is I can't even fathom the idea of doing this, let alone not being in an air-conditioned building. But we've gone too long. Our guest today is Alex Honnold, professional climber, and literally nothing else. We were instructed to say no other defining traits about this man.
Yeah, nothing about the Oscar-winning documentary or the fact that he's the only person to ever free solo Yosemite's El Cap. Nothing else. Just professional climber extraordinaire.
Well, I just climb a lot of things. Why list them all? You just do a lot of climbing.
Did you start on rocks or did you? Oh, go ahead.
There are different priorities here of our questions here. So let's talk about your question. I didn't know it won an Oscar. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was quite a crazy tour. A lot of time in Hollywood doing the whole rounds.
Was that different? Because being YouTubers, and sorry, Tyler, we'll get to the rock climbing in just a second, I swear. But being a YouTuber, like the both of us, we don't exist in the traditional, Hollywood sphere. Every time, I go to a red carpet event, I'm the most uncomfortable I've ever been. I hate red carpets. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I definitely felt the same way. Through the whole free solo film tour, I got more comfortable. Basically, it actually felt a lot like a climbing training program. It felt like periodized training because it was 6 months of nonstop events, and the events progressively got more difficult and bigger. You know, it was like you're going to the Audio Guild Awards, and then you're going to the Directors Guild Awards, and then you're going to the Producers Awards, and then you're going to the BAFTAs, like the British Academy Awards, and then you go to the actual Oscars, the Academy Awards. You know, and then later we went to the Emmys and all those kinds of things. But basically, each red carpet gets like bigger and more intimidating. You know, and so it's like you basically build up to it. So by the time we were doing the crazy ones like the Oscars, you're kind of like, oh, well, I did this other thing last week, and it literally felt like I was training for it. I was like, this is totally insane.
As an athlete, one of the things is like a lot of other professional athletes, like for football, basketball, all of that, they're required media time. Most climbers don't generally get media time. At least not very often.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah, so did it like feel like you were a caged animal, just everybody's watching it like you're in an aquarium or something, and they're all just kind of like poking at you to get answers?
I mean, a little bit. It's funny when you do events, I always think of myself as a piece of meat that's being shipped around the country in a little box. Like when you're getting put on planes and put in cars and being sent to a little thing, and then you get immediately put in a different car to go to a different thing. I always think of myself as like a rare piece of tuna getting shipped around. You know, it's like you just get put in your can, sent somewhere, people nibble. You know,
this is hilariously relatable because this is exactly how I felt in any event that I've ever gone to. I went to, the only thing I've ever gone to besides movie premieres was the Emmys. So one of my shows was nominated. Ghost. One of my shows was nominated, and did you have someone like going in front of you with a little piece of paper that being like, "This is who this is," or did everyone already know you?
Yeah, there's always the publicist being like, "Here's this person, like, make sure you get a picture of them," and you're kind of like, if they don't know and they don't care, do we need to tell them to care? It's like slightly embarrassing.
That's what I said. That's exactly what I said. Tyler knows. I talk about this all the time. It's like, I'm not going to force them to know who I am. If they want a picture, they can get one. I'm not going to ask them because why would I do that?
When people ask like, "Oh, are you the really famous person or something?" You're like, "Well, if you have to ask, then obviously not." It's like clearly that's a no because you don't have to ask. You know, when someone sees like Leonardo DiCaprio, they're not like, "Hey, are you that famous guy that was in a movie?" They're like, "No, that's fucking Leonardo DiCaprio." Oh, are we allowed to curse? Is this a curse?
Yeah, you can curse. You can curse.
Yeah, okay.
That is the craziest thing, and it just comes from this place of truth. Like it's just like why all this song and dance for something? And I get the pomp and the circumstance. Like some people need it, and like it's good to celebrate the project because I watched Free Solo and it was a very compelling movie, and I really enjoyed it. But sometimes all of that, the song and dance around everything, just like taints the original meaning behind it. I think like people that just want to like celebrate it in terms of the accolades of it instead of actually understanding like what went into it and the kind of sacrifice for it.
That drives me insane when people celebrate the success of the thing rather than the thing itself. When you're like, "Oh, I put years of work. You know, I've been climbing full time for 27 years or something, like basically my whole, you know, I'm 37, like basically since I was a 10-year-old, I've been climbing full time, like climbing 5 days a week and like put my whole life into it, put tons of work into it." And then someone's like, "Oh, wow, you have so many, you know, X followers on whatever social media platform because you're the guy that freestyles in Yellowstone." And you're like, "Oh man," you're like, "Come on, it's not even," you're like, "What? Like, who cares about any of that stuff? Like, I've devoted my whole life to trying to do something at a high level and do it as well as I possibly can. And all you care about is that, you know, like somebody wants to get a selfie with you." You're like, "That is so lame."
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad to hear it because man, I could go endlessly about it because that's also a very similar story. I haven't been doing we haven't been doing this stuff for as long. Like I've been doing YouTube for 11 years, and it's just such a violently different world. I approached it just because I loved making shit and I love the idea of independently making stuff. But when you get to a certain level, there's suddenly this expectation and assumptions that people have about who you are and what kind of steps you took and or not even ignoring like the steps behind. But I could talk endlessly about that. I'll let Tyler actually talk about the sport of it all.
Yeah. So I was actually curious because I know you started rock climbing at a young age, but did you climb trees before you found like rock walls and stuff?
Yeah, I climbed everything. Basically, by sheer good fortune, a climbing gym opened in my hometown when I was 10-ish. And so my parents read about it in the paper and they took me in and, you know, I sort of fell into rock climbing that way. But I was already climbing on buildings and climbing on fences and, you know, trees. I just loved, you know, the movement of getting up on things and playing around. I love the air. Like I love being up high.
That was me as a kid too. No, sorry,
Yeah,
Tyler. I'll let you talk.
Oh my god, it's all about you.
It's really funny because did you ever get in trouble doing that? Because I grew up with my brother, and my brother did the same thing. My brother is a lot of the reason why I got into climbing. I did scouts and some of that other stuff, but my brother was climbing trees when I was really little, and so I started following him up the trees. As we got older, he started getting kicked out of parks and different things for climbing on stuff. Did that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I don't know. I don't actually remember getting in serious trouble, though I broke my arm a couple times as a kid, falling off of play structures and falling out of trees and things. I don't know. I mean, I actually now have a daughter who's a year and a quarter. And I got to say, raising a kid, I'm like, I really think that climbing is a pretty elemental movement pattern. Like, it's basic, it's innate. Like, everybody likes to climb. Like, kids are all into it. I mean, she loves clambering up on things and like, getting up and exploring. I kind of think that that's innate in all humans, but you learn your way out of it. You sort of develop fear. You get told not to. You get told that it's dangerous. And so people sort of learn their way away from it.
Which is such a silly thing because it is very fundamental. I think it's proven that like kids have greater grip strength than anything else just because they need to like hold on to their parents or whatever. But as I was a kid, I was doing the same thing. I was jumping up on play sets and stuff like that. I broke my arm having a how far out the monkey bars can you jump?
Exactly.
But it kind of all ended, and I think like the reason I'm so like fear averse now is because I was having a how far up the stairs can you jump contest with my brother, and we set up couch cushions at the bottom, and I bounced off of the couch cushions, apparently I don't remember this, and my head went right into the corner of the railing, and then apparently blood everywhere. And again, don't remember a thing. I woke up in the emergency room being like, what happened? But ever since then I've never climbed up on as much stuff as I did in the past, but I still love climbing. I still love going to the gym. I'm very much of the mind like Tyler's crazy and his brother's crazier for all the kind of stuff they do. And I guess by association, I'm calling you crazy for what you do.
Yeah, so then therefore I must be super crazy because I think the things I'm doing are in a different category than...
But when you get past a certain amount of crazy, it's all the same crazy. So
it's all just crazy, yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. What gym do you climb in?
Oh, I live in LA, so there's a few places, Stronghold, that Tyler and I used to go to Stronghold, and then there's this new one, another Touchstone place that opened up nearby here.
Cliffs of M.A.D.D.Y or the Hollywood Boulders?
I've been to Hollywood Boulders.
Yeah, there's one out in Pasadena that just opened up that's pretty nice. I like that one.
Oh, there's a new Touchstone gym in Pasadena?
Yeah, it's right, it's actually in Altadena. And it's got about like 50-foot rope walls. Tyler, I actually meant to tell you that they actually have pretty high rope walls, and I think they even have like a lead climbing course. I've never done any of that. Tyler taught me how to tie a figure eight like 6 years ago, so I'm very new to all of this. Tyler got me into it, actually.
Yeah, getting into top rope and doing that stuff, which is primarily what I've climbed. My brother does trad, and he does sport climbing as well, but trad is the part that just baffles me, just the ability to understand and carry all of that equipment and put it in. The part that terrifies me, and I don't know if you feel the same way, for whatever reason, I feel more comfortable without the equipment than I do with it.
That just means you don't know how to use the equipment yet. I was the same way. I was the exact same way when I learned how to trad climb, like when I learned how to place gear, because at that point I'd already been climbing in the gym for 10 years and I was already like quite a good climber. And so I felt confident in my climbing, but I just didn't trust the gear at all because I hadn't really used it and I hadn't fallen on it. And so it was hard to believe that some of these little pieces of metal would catch me if I fell, 20 feet onto them or something. And so then you wind up climbing in such a way, you basically are almost pretending that you don't have a rope and you don't have gear because you trust your ability to climb, but you don't trust anything else in the system. And you're like, oh, geez, this is so scary. But then over time, you wind up taking those falls. You learn that the gear does all work. It all holds properly. Like, you learn to trust yourself and how well you can place the gear. And then eventually climbing on gear winds up feeling about the same as climbing on bolts, like, sport climbing or climbing in the gym or whatever else. It's like once you really trust all the elements of the system, it all just feels like climbing. And actually, as you were just starting to talk about, the different types of climbing that you do, I mean, if this is a sporting podcast and we're actually talking about like sports more broadly, I think it's actually kind of important to note that, there are a bunch of different aspects of climbing. There are a lot of different sub-disciplines, but fundamentally they're all just climbing. They're all moving your body over rock or plastic. Running is running. You can do it at different distances, at different intensities, but it's like the form is basically the same. You're still moving your body in the same way. And so I think climbing is basically just climbing. The other things are a matter of, things that you learn, like how to use the gear, like learning the medium, like the different types of rock and things like that, like changing styles. But it's like climbing is fundamentally always the same.
I mean, also with like longer climbs, the ability to understand where you can take an opportunity to rest and kind of relax one hand and get that pump a little bit subdued for a moment so that you can get back into it. Like, that's one of the things that I've always had a struggle with, because I have a fear of heights, and it's weird being a climber that has a fear of heights.
Though there are a surprising number of climbers that are afraid of heights. I think that's not uncommon.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, because I think they're just, well, a lot of people get into climbing because they're trying to manage a fear of heights in some ways.
Yeah.
Or people are really afraid of it, so they go to the gym trying to tackle their fears, and then they really like climbing for whatever reason. They like the movement, they like the problem-solving component, or they just like pushing past their fear and sort of overcoming that part of themselves. But it's definitely common to meet people who are passionate climbers who also say that they're afraid of heights. Though fundamentally, you're probably better off not being afraid of heights if you want to be a good climber.
You gotta turn that switch off. Why are you bringing that up with you on the mountain?
I know in the free solo thing, they did the MRI and everything and looked into your stimulation as far as like fears and stuff go, and yours is like requires a lot more. Do you feel like that gives you an advantage, or do you think that fear actually adds a focus element to it? I mean, there's a level in which fear can be paralyzing, but there's a level in which it makes you so much more aware.
Yeah, actually, so that scene in Free Solo is a little oversimplified, I think, and that was taken, I was actually there with a print journalist. This guy was writing for Nautilus magazine, which is like this science magazine, and they were sort of doing like a deeper dive into how my brain responds to fear and things. And so I think that the scene in the film is maybe not taken out of context, but just a little too short and too pithy, where you're like, oh, well, he just doesn't feel fear. And you're like, well, really, I think that the takeaway from that whole experience was more that I've sort of desensitized myself to a certain level of stimulus over time. And so it's not so much that I don't experience fear, it's just that I wasn't really registering from that test. Because, the test that we were doing to measure fear, you're looking at black and white pictures in an MRI tube.
Yeah, you're not on a rock face or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
I've conditioned myself to a higher level of fear response, or a different level. Looking at a picture, I mean, typically that still registers the same part in the brain for people. But if you've spent the last 10 or 15 years of your life consistently being really scared for your own safety, like clearly a picture isn't going to do it for you. I feel fear. It just takes a lot more to, I actually have to feel like I'm in danger to feel fear.
That's such a funny description, because literally my career for the past 10 years, I've been playing nothing but horror games. So I also have conditioned myself to be a lot more tolerant of scares and loud noises than I was 10 years ago. But that doesn't mean that I'm less scared of anything. It's just like, if you show me a scary picture or play a scary game, it takes more to get me scared. I'll be just as scared towards the end of it if I can get there, but it's just like, yeah, it is that kind of desensitization. If you do something for so long.
And you're probably just as afraid of public speaking or whatever, like snakes or, random other things that people are afraid of. It's like, just because you've really conditioned yourself in some ways doesn't mean that you're not afraid of anything else. It's like you're probably still afraid of commitment or whatever, afraid of why
are you speaking to how are you
exactly. Exactly.
We're getting called out here.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, though. People are like, oh, well, he just doesn't feel fear. And you're like, no, I've just, there are certain things that are not as scary as they used to be. And even that, I know, is a conditioned response over time, because I remember when certain aspects of climbing used to be incredibly scary, and now, 20 years later, they just feel pretty normal and pretty routine or whatever. It's like anything you do a lot of, you get good at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you still climb regularly, so do you find yourself climbing more in gyms, or going out and climbing on the rock faces nearby?
No, I climb outside as much as I can. I mean, when I travel for work or anything, if I'm doing events, then I'll go to the gym. But I probably climb 5 days a week. When I'm at home, then it's almost entirely on rock, because I live outside Las Vegas, and there's like limitless good rock that you can climb year round. It just depends where I am and what time of year and everything. But basically, I climb all the time.
It's funny. My one takeaway from watching Free Solo was, yeah, you climbed a mountain. That was super cool. Man, your van was sick.
Oh, yeah.
It put this desire for me to have like a fully converted van that I could just tour around the country and go wherever I want, like take all my equipment with me, like just build out and live in a van. For a while there, before I'd even seen the movie, I did like this video series where I bought a van for $5,000. Someone had kitted it out and had a bed in the back of it, and I just like became infatuated with this idea of like having all that I have on the road, and I still haven't gotten like a really good one or converted one myself. Like, do you still have the van? That's the question.
Well, so actually, I accidentally flipped the van that was in Free Solo, but it was totally fine. But then it turns out that my wife was, we found out my wife was pregnant right after, so we kind of need a different van anyway, because we need a kid seat, we need like a chair and a kid's bed and the whole thing. So now we have a different van, which with a little kid's room. And actually next week we're going to be going on the road for the whole month of June, going climbing in Washington.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
Yeah, so we'll be full van life again for a while. I mean, we tend to do maybe a couple months a year in the van still.
Do you feel like now that you're a father, it's kind of changed how you approach things, or are you still doing the same stuff and putting yourself out there in the same ways?
I mean, I'm still basically doing the same things. You know, I mean, obviously being a father has changed how I spend my time. Actually, I mean, the biggest day-to-day difference is that when I go to the cliff now, I'm just in a little bit more of a hurry where I like hustle to the cliff, get my climbing in, hustle home just to sort of minimize my time away when possible. When you're like a mid-20s single guy living in a car, you just spend the whole day hanging out at the cliff because you're like, well, I'm just going back to my car anyway. Like, what else? You know, you just like hang out at the cliff. Now I'm trying to spend as much time at home as possible, or as much time with the family as possible, while still doing the same amount of climbing. Yeah, just being more strategic about things. Still climbing all the same stuff though.
So I have a question that's just hearing you talk about it in this way is interesting, because what I sometimes think about is being a public facing figure. I know that I have this kind of influence on people. I hate the term influencer and like stuff like that, but I know that there is an influence in terms of inspiring people and inspiring people to do what I do. And people ask me all the time, like, how do I get started in like making YouTube videos and whatever have you. But with what you do specifically, it's different, and even I'd say it's different than like with some sports where, you know, it's a sport and it's dangerous. But with free solo in particular, it's free soloing in particular, it's exceptionally dangerous. And yet, given the popularity of the movie, I'm sure people were inspired about it. Do you ever think about the idea that you are inspiring people? And something that I have a lot of trouble with sometimes is I'm inspiring people and they ask me, and I know that not all of them will succeed, but I would never discourage anyone from doing that. And yet the penalty for failure in doing your particular activity is extremely dangerous. Do you ever think about that or wrestle with that at all? And if you don't want to talk about it, it's totally fine, because it's a bit of a grim subject. But
I'm pretty unstressed about that kind of thing. I mean, I do think that there's, you know, a responsibility as a public-facing person to sort of be a good role model, I guess. The thing with free soloing, though, is I think it's probably more comparable to sort of the inspiration that people get from mainstream sports stars than you might think. Because I think when people watch the NBA, you know, if somebody's like inspired by LeBron James, they're not inspired to go out and play basketball. They're just inspired in a general sense of pursuing excellence and doing the best they can in the things that they're interested in. And certainly with the film Free Solo, when it was still in theaters and I was doing all these movie events, you know, you would talk to audience. You know, I was doing so many film events, and so you meet all these audiences, and people are like, oh, I'm so inspired, but none of them are inspired to go free soloing. They're all inspired to do this difficult thing that they want to in their life. Or, you know, they're inspired to sign up for that first half marathon that they've been thinking about but haven't been doing because it seems too daunting. You know, it's like, I think the thing with free soloing is that it helps people put, you know, their own challenges into perspective a little bit. But nobody sees the film, they're like, I'm going to do that. And, you know, I know that because, I mean, this is kind of a longer conversation about climbing and risk-taking and whatever, but over the 25 plus years that I've been a climber, that kind of dangerous side of climbing has almost died out. Like, basically nobody does that anymore. Like, nobody is doing the extreme climbing. Like, free soloing is less common than it used to be. Speed climbing is way less common than it used to be. Like, basically, like, certain aspects of climbing that are more dangerous are just not popular anymore, and they're not cool, and like nobody's doing them. And you know, I remember 10 or 15 years ago, they were definitely more cool. More people were into it. It's like now, I mean, with the growth of gym climbing and sort of indoor climbing culture and like climbing going into the Olympics, things like that, it's just not. People might watch free solo and get all inspired, but they're just not actually going out and doing anything dangerous. Like, I don't feel bad about inspiring the wrong, I don't know. Because also, I kind of think that the main takeaway from the film is that if you're going to do something difficult, put a ton of freaking work into it. Like, take your time, prepare for it, and, you know, eventually try to live your dream or whatever, not to be too cliche, too hokey. But it's like, you know, that's something that I wanted to do for 10 years. I want to put in 2 years of concentrated effort into training for it at a very high level, and then eventually being able to do. You know, I'm like, that's not a terrible lesson for people to take from a film.
My favorite moment in the film was actually when you stopped, when you were going for your first run of trying to actually free solo it, and you stopped and were like, I'm just not feeling it, and you felt off, and you were just like, I want to get down and not do it today because it just what didn't feel right. And that to me was all inspiring in the fact of like acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging yourself, and being like, it's just not right, and I don't want to try and force myself through it. You took that opportunity to take that break and take a step back and then reevaluate and then continue pursuing it.
Some days just aren't your day. You know, you got to make sure you're choosing the right day. And I think that's actually a big difference between climbing and other sports. If we're really talking about sports on this podcast, I mean, the thing with climbing is that you can always choose your day. You know, most hole and or ball and hole sports like you're the master of, you don't really get to choose your day. You know, like you have to perform on whatever day somebody tells you to. And if it's not your day, then you just lose. And you're like, oh, that's a bummer. But the thing with climbing is if you're in tune with your own, I hate to say your own feelings, whatever, but you're sort of in touch with yourself, you can kind of tell when it's your time to shine.
Yeah, and that's why I like really respect about everything you do, and that's why I respect about climbing and why I kind of gravitated towards it from Tyler's inspiration. This is because it is just you against a wall. You know, it's really you against yourself, and it's all internal. And not that I don't like team sports. I haven't had a lot of chance to play many team sports throughout my life, but in a lot of ways it relates to what I do with content creation. And what I love about it is like, I have editors and I have a team, and I just got off filming like a movie with a big crew and all that. But the real part of it that I love is coming back into this room and just being able to apply myself and test my skills, push myself, and reach new levels of content creation, see what I can explore, what skills I can build, because I love the craft part of it. And I think like there's no pure explanation of that with rock climbing. It's just like, it's so clear. You are the only one there. I don't usually climb with friends most of the time. Sometimes Tyler and I will go together, but it's just you against a wall. And it's very able to just get in your head. And I think like that's a freeing moment that many people are probably scared of, to be able to just be with themselves for that long. But it's like, to me, that's a beautiful moment.
That's definitely one of the things that a lot of people love about climbing, though, is that it can force them to be fully focused on a task at hand. So they're not distracted. They're not thinking about other things. They're just performing. It's just them and their body doing a thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's certainly one of the things I love about climbing, is that you're just climbing.
One of our audience members, occasionally we give them some preface and allow them to ask some questions. And one of them kind of asked, like, if it wasn't rock climbing, if somehow rock climbing never existed, it never was around in your life, is there another sport that you think you would have gravitated towards?
It's hard to say. I just don't love anything else the way I love climbing. You know, maybe I could have gotten into like mountain running and things like that. Like I like scrambling in the mountains, you know, mountain biking, like skiing to some extent, like getting around in those kinds of in that kind of terrain. But it's hard to say because, you know, I kind of love all those things now that I've been a full-time climber my whole life, and so I've just spent so much time in the mountains. But, you know, when I was growing up in suburban California, and I was just bicycling to the climbing gym. You know, the world of mountain running was so far removed from anything I knew about. It's like hard to imagine how I ever would have fallen into those kinds of things without climbing as this avenue. I don't know. I mean, I was definitely on track to just become an engineer and have a normal job, and you know, like I dropped out of university after a year to go climbing, and you know, if I hadn't been a passionate climber, I'd probably be working as a civil engineer right now.
That is weird.
I'll be out there in a minute.
I dropped out of engineering school to pursue YouTube, biomedical engineering myself, but I got 4 years in.
Where were you going?
I was going to University of Cincinnati. It was just like, yeah, my stepmom worked at like Turner Construction Company. So originally I was going in for civil engineering too, but I said, fuck that. And then I went to an even harder engineering course, and I did 4 years of that. And then I started like, man, I really got to do something on my own. And that's when I picked up YouTube after trying a few different things first. But yeah, it's just like that feeling of, oh man, there's something that I love. There's something that I really love that I never knew existed. I didn't have video creation even when I was a kid because I didn't have cameras or anything like that. But it's like when you find that thing you love, that's why I'm so hesitant. And I asked that other questions because I'm still like, I tell everyone that asks me, like, how do I start? I'm like, go for it today. Like, start, like, do it. You may fail, you may not, but it's like the most important thing is to do it and find it, because when you find that one thing that you love, that you can't do without, that you would be happy to do every day of your life for, and you'd be happy like sliding into the grave doing that thing if you could just get one more day, that's a beautiful moment, and I know so many people out there don't get that, whether it's climbing or football or whatever sport or whatever activity. There's so many people out there that don't even take the first step to try, and I only ever encourage people to take that, even if failure's on the horizon. Like, it's, you never know.
Honestly, I mean, I'm only a year into parenting, but I'm starting to think that is the number one thing, that the number one role of a parent is to help your child find anything that they care about that much. Like, to find any kind of passion, like to find things that they're excited about, things that get them out of bed, things that make them want to try hard and like push themselves, you know, whether that's sport or whether that's, you know, art, or hopefully not content creation for my daughter, but you know what to say. Like, we'll just, yeah, like, I don't know. But I mean, but basically anything that gets her up, gets her motivated, like gets her passionate, you know, because it's like, you only have your one life. You may as well do stuff that you care about, that you enjoy doing your whole life. I mean, I'm so fortunate that I've had climbing to put all my energy into my entire life. I mean, I think I'm starting to realize now what a gift it's been. Just to, like, something that inspires you enough to lead a healthy lifestyle and, like, you know, get enough sleep and, like, basically, like, lead your best life. You know, like, go to bed early, wake up early, like, try your hardest and, like, have a really nice day. And you're like, you know what? Like, how great is it that I found this thing that I love doing enough that it, like, keeps me on a good track for my whole life? Like, it's, yeah, I freaking love climbing.
Tyler, what's your thing that gets you out of bed every day? What's your passion?
Holes and balls, or balls and holes, or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, you know, that's the ultimate thing.
A master of balls and holes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason that kind of came up is it was a joke in an early episode of the podcast when I was talking about my master's degree in sport administration. And for the longest time, it was all the variety of sports. For me, it's meeting people and being able to talk to them and hear about what inspires them, and finding out, you know, being able to touch somebody's life in a way to where you make an impact or they make an impact on you, and being able to learn and expand and socialize. I'm weird, I'm an extrovert, but I've always found value more in people than anything else. And so I really enjoy being able to create stuff and help other people, and being able to make the world kind of a better place, or even just make somebody's day. If I have an opportunity to make somebody's day in any way, I like to take that opportunity. And that's always been like the biggest reason I like getting out of bed, is like, who am I going to meet today? Who am I going to talk to? Whether it's an Uber driver or whoever, I really enjoy getting to know the person.
See, I don't get that at all.
Yeah, see, I don't either. But I was just thinking, like, this is why it's so important that I think, for as a parent, that you help your child, like, find the thing that they care about, because you never really know what's going to be the passion that gets somebody out of bed. It's like, people just have to try things and find their thing. You know, it's like, I'm definitely an introvert, and that kind of stuff sounds like a nightmare to me. You know, I'm like, oh man, like that's not what gets me out of bed. But you know, I'm glad that you're psyched on it. You know, it's like, that's the thing, is there's no such thing as too much passion in the world. You know, people should be fired up on what they're doing.
That's just like, and that is the fascinating thing, is like, because why me and Tyler work so well is because we are very much opposite in certain ways, but we also come together in like very, very specific categories. Like we do anything if, like, we're loyal to a fault and all that stuff. He's got great characters, but talking to people, I can't do that shit. So he's very good at like going out there and just meeting a random dude and keeping up with people. I'm awful with that. Can't do anything about that. But, and also sports. He knows sports real good.
A master.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, when you're super passionate about something, you never really get burned out. When I went to grad school, for the longest time, I got burned out of sport, not necessarily because of being required to watch all these sports and be around all of these sports, but I got burned out because I felt like the sports industry turned its back on me. Was there ever a moment where because in climbing that doesn't really happen, but there's a giant community within climbing. Did you ever feel at any point, like growing up or throughout your career, that you felt kind of ostracized or different, or like you weren't involved or included in that way?
No, basically no. I mean, you know, I've never had great social skills. I mean, I've sort of learned them as I've gone, and you know, because of things like the Free Solo movie tour, I've gotten way more comfortable with speaking to groups and speaking to audiences and whatever. And so I think, and part of that's just maturing and becoming an adult and having a wife now. And you know, I'm way better. I have better social skills now than I used to. But certainly when I was young, I was a bit of a tweaker. You know, like I was not good at. I was very shy, kind of a loner. Not, you know, I mean, I was not well adjusted. That's not to say that the community wasn't good to me. I mean, basically, like, the climbing community has always been my, you know, I mean, really, it's been my only community. I mean, I joke that, you know, I only have like one friend from childhood left over who's like a non-climber. You know, it's like I went to school with a bunch of people from like second grade through 12th, like kind of one program. So there were a bunch of people that I knew for my whole life. And, only one of them still remains. Like everyone else I know now is like in the climbing community or, a long-term climbing friend. Or it's like, the climbing world is my entire life and it has been for 20 years. So it's like, it's basically everything. It's hard for me to even separate that kind of stuff because it's like climbing has been my entire life. It's like literally everything is wrapped around the climbing community.
Have you ever done ice climbing at all?
Yeah, very poorly. I can ice climb, but I don't like it and I'm not any good at it.
It's an interesting question, Tyler, about the ostracization because in the YouTube community, which is a fucking nightmare. Like, don't start a YouTube channel. Like, it's a nightmare out here. But there are times like I've felt not incorporated in the YouTube community because I don't really interact with a lot of other YouTubers. There's many YouTubers that I respect and there's many YouTubers that I don't. But it's like I never even talk to the people that I don't. So I've always felt a part of the community. But I wonder, Tyler, because, and I know like Alex is a guest here, but Tyler, honest question here is like, do you think that your feeling of ostracization is like part of you being an extrovert and therefore wanting to get feedback from other people and like, so you would be more sensitive to that? Because I'm sure there are tons of people in the YouTube community that don't hate my guts and would like want me to fail and not be a part of their stuff, but I also don't pay them any mind because I am introverted and I am more focused just on me and the people I do care about. Do you feel like you are more sensitive to that because you are extroverted and more in tune with the people around you?
I could fully believe that. I mean, the main thing for me is I couldn't find a job coming out of getting my master's degree and stuff like that. But
that's an interesting question because I think my wife is way more extroverted and way more attuned to that kind of stuff, like social things and like whether or not other people are happy and if they care and like was that person offended by this thing that happened, and it all just goes right over my head. Like I just don't see or hear any of it and I just don't care. I'm like completely untroubled by it all. I'm like, maybe that is a fundamental personality thing where it's like, oh, if you're a little more extrovert, you just notice that stuff more.
And part of that is like, Mark and I have had that conversation, is like his ability to just kind of focus in on the stuff that he cares about and let the outside noise fall away. I feel like that's an advantage that you guys have that I feel like I end up hearing and paying attention to the outside noise because I'm more in tune with it. And so being able to focus in on just kind of what you're passionate about could be a major advantage for you guys and being able to pursue your endeavors.
Yeah, that's the beauty of really finding a passion, having something that you can be so focused on that all the noise doesn't matter. It's like, because honestly, so much of the modern world is noise. It's like random stuff clamoring for your attention, but stuff that doesn't really matter and isn't going to enrich your life. And like when you die, you're not going to remember and you're not going to care about so many of the random little things. It's like, it's nice to have something that you care about enough that those distractions fall away.
Yeah, and I often find that, and I've talked to Tyler about this, but when it comes down to, let's say, negative comments on YouTube, there's many other creators that like they pay attention to that and they feel really impacted by it. But I've always had the thing where I see it and I gloss over it. That's what Tyler's talking about because I don't know them and they don't know me. Therefore, I instinctively don't pay any attention to it. But if, say, Tyler said something critical to me or my girlfriend said something critical to me, it would kill me. It would hit me so much harder. So it's like, not that I don't feel. Do you ever feel that where it's like the people that you do care about, it's like amplified in a way versus like everything else is noise, but the things that you do care about really strike deep?
I don't know if it's necessarily amplified, but I'm totally the same in that, of course, with the things that I do, you get a lot of public opinion on like, oh, that's, like he's a bad role model. That's a bad example. Like this is stupid. Like he's wasting his life, like, whatever. But all those kind of comments, they don't know you, you don't know them. They're just like randomly shouting into the void. You're like, who cares? Like everybody can have their opinion, like it doesn't matter. But certainly the opinion of my peers matters a lot more. Like if climbers that I deeply respect, though actually I've never really had like any drama like that in the climbing world. But yeah, I certainly care more about what my friends think. And that's kind of the thing, like when you do something hard as a climber and you it's like put out there, like either a film thing or whatever. It's like, oh, I did this hard thing. Like the public response doesn't really matter nearly as much as the response of your friends. Because if your friends text you being like, whoa, I can't believe you did that thing, then you're like, okay, like that's proud. It's like really you just want to impress your friends.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so awesome to hear. I've met very few people who think in a similar way, and it's like, to me, it's common sense because it's like I try to tell my like fellow content creators all the time. It's like, those comments don't matter. You don't know them. They're probably just like kids, like you said, screaming into the void. It's just like the internet is just a big echo chamber, a box that people shout into. Doesn't mean you have to listen to it.
And that kind of negativity, half the time, or like, I mean, some of the time anyway, it's probably not even people that are that negative about whatever you did. It's like people trying to get a comment, trying to get a rise, trying to get you to respond to them. It's like basically people looking for some kind of connection, basically. I feel like on social media platforms, like half of the biggest haters are really just people that want you to engage with them in some way because they're like kind of into it and they just want a connection. And, you know, you're sort of like if I could just give you a hug, it would all be fine, you know, but it's like instead it's going to turn into some flame war online. And I'm like, you know, I just don't need to worry about it. I'll just like pretend I gave him a hug and call it good and move on. Like it's fine.
I mean, obviously when you climb, and climbing with people watching is one thing, climbing with all the cameras and everything around, how did you find, like, I imagine times and times and times of repetitions where you had the film crew for different climbs that you had done and everything like that. How nerve-wracking was it to try and figure out how to document it without getting in the way and making sure that you could still remain focused, especially with El Cap and some of these free solos you've done? Like, seeing something out of the corner of your eye and it catching your attention could make like a whole world of difference between life and death in those situations. I mean, you obviously worked really closely with the camera team and everything like that, but did it take a lot of practice before to be able to get comfortable?
A little bit. I mean, maybe less than you might think. And so one thing, you know, I mean, and people sometimes frame the question kind of as you did, is like, oh, you know, there are people all over the wall or there are cameras all over. But so in the film Free Solo, when I did the Free Solo of El Cap, there were, I forget now, but maybe 5 or 6 people on the wall spread over a 3,000 foot face. So that basically means that every 500 feet or so, there was like a dude. And, you know, and also all the camera people are all really good, close friends. And, you know, people that I climb with routinely and trust. But the thing is, if you're passing one person every 500 feet of rock climbing, it does not feel very crowded. You know, you're sort of like, you're climbing a really freaking long ways, and then you like see one of your buddies and he's hanging 20 feet off to the side to get like a certain angle, like get some rad wide shot or whatever. And you're kind of like, hey, and you know, in general, everybody I saw on the wall, I'm like psyched to see them because you're like covering oceans of granite by yourself, and then you're like, hey buddy, and then they're gone again, and then you have another 500 feet by yourself. So it definitely doesn't feel like it changes the experience that much. Like you're still very much alone up there, but you just get a few moments where you get to see some friends. But it did take, as you said, it took a little bit of practice to get to that point. And so for me and the film crew to figure out what the best locations were for them, like what's the least intrusive, you know, where they could have their ropes out of the way. There were a lot of sort of logistical questions of like, how do you get in and out of position without it being in the way? But those are the things that we had all, those are problems that we had solved over the 2 years that I had to work on the route anyway, because it took me a lot of time just practicing to figure out how to do the climbing. So while we worked on that, we figured out all the camera positions, figured out the strategy. Yeah, I mean, on the actual day when I did it, I mean, I was pretty psyched to be up there with my friends. You know, it felt like we had all been working on the project as a team, and, you know, it's pretty freaking cool. Like, I mean, fun little story. So Jimmy Chin, the co-director of the film, was filming in one of the sort of key locations 600 feet down from the summit. And when I passed him and made it around this corner, from there to the top is like kind of easier climbing. I mean, it's still challenging, but I knew I was in there and I knew it was fine. And so the final 600 feet were kind of like victory lap style, where I felt like I was just cruising to the top and having a good time. And Jimmy kind of asked me to wait for him so that he could be on the summit to get like you're getting to the top shot, you know, which is like sort of an important shot. There was another guy who had hiked to the top who would be there, you know, to have a camera, but Jimmy wanted to be there to like capture the moment. But I had my phone going in my pocket with timer, and I knew that I was going to be close to breaking 4 hours, which, I mean, it was going to be a speed record no matter what, but I kind of wanted to go sub 4 because it's just cool to climb El Cap with no rope in under 4 hours. I was like, this is epic, you know. So I was kind of like, yeah, Jimmy, like I can wait for you for a minute, but I'm not going to wait too long because I want to break 4. It wound up being 3:56, you know, so I didn't have like that much time to spare. And so I started climbing the final 600 feet, and he was ascending ropes around this corner. And so I could hear him, like, I could hear his gear jangling and everything as he's, like, hoofing it. You know, he's, like, breathing super loudly, trying to ascend rope as fast as he can. He's, like, trying to, like, get up. And I was, like, cruising up the rock. I was totally, at that point I was like peak performance, feeling incredible because I was past all the hard parts. I was having a good time. I was like incredibly attuned to it. And so I was making these little bird whistles for him so that he could hear where I was, so that he could like keep pace basically. I felt like I was basically chasing up the wall being like, faster Jimmy, faster, as he's trying to get to the top. And it's like basically we're all up there having a great time. And so by the time I get to the top, he made it up a few minutes ahead of me. He looked like he's gonna freaking die. He's like gonna have a freaking heart attack because he's like ascending these free hanging ropes as fast as he can. And I get up and I'm like, what a great experience. So in that way, I think when done well, having a crew around documenting it doesn't really change. It's basically you and your friends having this incredible experience together in nature. Like it's still a pretty good time.
Yeah, it's like making something and building something and having them there to see something that you pushed yourself to do and worked so hard to do. Then you get that celebration moment at the end.
I mean, in that case especially, we had all worked so hard on it. Because the film crew had been helping me carry ropes up and down and equip ropes and pull them up and down on the cliff. I mean, it's just a lot of hard physical labor that we'd all been doing together for literally years. And so you're like, it's just great to feel like the whole team is by sheer good luck, the next day in Yosemite was a Sunday, and they do this crazy Sunday brunch at the fancy hotel in Yosemite. And so the entire crew and everybody all went to Sunday brunch and just freaking gorged. And it was like a nice, sort of wrap party celebration. Like, holy shit, we did this thing. And now we're going to go eat like a, Nutella-filled French toast until we all die. It's so funny.
So fascinating. It's one of my favorite lines from the movie, besides the van, of course. I love the van. But just like that moment where you look at the camera towards 2/3 of the way and you just go like, I'm not dead yet. That's one of my favorite. Because it's like, it is just kind of like you're just making a joke and it's just like casually going up there. But then I was just like, because this is my ignorance. I never do research before any of this stuff, so I'm looking at the Free Solo Wikipedia page. I just read the most nonsensical sentence in the controversy section. I don't know if you've ever gone in.
Is there? No, I didn't know there was one. Now I'm going to open it right now. There's a controversy around Free Solo?
It's hilarious.
Wait, I'm going to open it right now. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, it's some analysis from Simon Fraser University professor of history and geography. Not a climber, apparently. But it makes me think that people buy in too much into what the story and what the movie and the emotions of the movie is. Because obviously a movie needs to have drama and it needs to have heightened emotion. And there's got to be risk and danger to it. And naturally there is. But it's just this quote at the end here is, Taylor echoes Benson Allett in the description of Honnold's challenges and risks throughout the film. Quote, make no mistake, we are watching the commodification of actuarial suicide. And I'm like, the fuck does that sentence even mean? Like, it's just like the most nonsensical things that people will say and try to analyze about what amounts to a very difficult and yes, risky thing, but done in the most professional, safest way possible. Like, just because something's dangerous doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done, in my mind. And there are different levels of that, but that entirely depends on the person's ability and confidence in their own skill to do it. And so obviously you did it, and it was filmed beautifully, and the movie was crafted. And yet people can like take these weird opinions out of it that are in no way any part of the actual creative process. Like,
no, it's funny you say that. So now I just pulled up the Wikipedia. I'm going to have to read this link later. I'm like, so interesting. But so surprisingly, actually, his take there is not that far off sort of my personal opinion on some sports as well. Because I mean, throughout the film, actually, I don't know if you remember in the film Free Solo, there's this long rant or sort of like long, what do you even call that? Just like, I give this sort of soliloquy, like I give this talk in the middle where I'm talking about like warrior spirit and like warrior culture sort of stuff. Like, you have to be a warrior. It's slightly embarrassing for me to hear now because that came from some climbing we were doing in Morocco. Basically, we were doing this like month of hard climbing, and I was like by myself. Well, I mean, we were filming, but I was like staying by myself. And all my downtime, I was watching this show, Spartacus, like some slave uprising. It's basically like sex and violence, like mindless television.
the HBO one?
Yeah, or no, it was like Stars or something, I think. Like, it was something like kind of trashy, but like kind of amazing. It's like perfect mindless distraction when you're doing like hard physical thing all day, and then you go back to your room and you just watch people like fighting.
I think I quote that all the time because it was like, just as Jupiter spreads cheek to ram cock and ass. Like, I just quote that all the time randomly to my friends, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, it's from this fucking weird. I can't even explain where it comes from.
Well, so I was watching that show. It was basically about gladiators, and it was kind of like, I couldn't help but feel like filming free soloing was like modern blood sport sort of stuff. because you're basically, and I actually think that even more so with mainstream sports like American football and things.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, this is basically like modern gladiators, where it's like people are for sure getting injured. You know, when you think of all the freaking brain injury stuff and like crazy, it's just crazy how much money goes into watching people hurt each other for entertainment. You know, and that is kind of the tension in the film Free Solo, is like, oh, like, is he going to die? You know, it's like you're watching because you're sort of like, oh, is this person, like, is this a snuff film? You're like, this is pretty hardcore. I mean, obviously I don't see it that way because, you know, I'm doing it for the passion of climbing and for the challenge of it and you know, because what climbing has given to my life. But if you're just looking as an entertainment product, you are like, oh, this is kind of hardcore. Like, this is kind of crazy. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe one of the differences, though, is that Free Solo, the film, is a bit of a one-off sort of thing. You know, it's like you just can't make films like that all the time. There isn't like Free Solo 2 and Free Solo 3. It's like, it basically documents like a unique moment in my life, as opposed to other sorts of mainstream sports where it's like every Sunday people go out and just like club each other on the head as hard as they can. And you're like, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and that's what I think from that quote is like the commodification of actual aerial suicide. It's beautifully worded, but it's like, yeah, the commodity is like what typical sports are today. And not that it's a bad thing, like there's entertainment to be had about it, but it's like, buying into what I was saying about like the story of Free Solo is the movie as an entertainment product, and then the actuality of it is like the climbing of it and the reason for it. But that's fascinating that like that this view and tying it into other sports is like, yeah, it is. I guess it is like very similar to that in terms of there's something base human about wanting to look at a car crash. You know, they want to know what the end is when they can distance themselves from it and turn it into just a story purely from the story's sake of it. And I think that's a fascinating, like, there's no wrong answer. It's just a matter of perspective.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the term actuarial suicide, like, yeah, it's true that if you just took the whole Free Solo film process and you multiplied it by 1,000 or you know, 10,000, for sure I would die, you know, some of those times, because it's like, it's a numbers thing. But if you applied that to mainstream, like just sort of a sedentary lifestyle, that would be true as well. You know, you take somebody just chilling on their sofa, like eating a, you know, whatever. It's like you multiply that out by 50 years. I mean, and that basically is actuarial science. You know, it's like you're running life insurance assessments of like, well, you're middle aged, you're sedentary, you're overweight, like you're probably going to die young. You know, it's like that's also actuarial suicide. So you're kind of like, well, you know, which is better or worse? I don't know. I mean, free solo climbing. It's true that if you were just doing elite hardcore free soloing all the time, like, yeah, you'd eventually die. But if you do it very sparingly, as sort of a highlight to years of training and effort, you know, it's like, yeah, it's risky, but you're choosing your risks very intentionally. And I feel like for most people, you know, living a normal lifestyle, you're just not choosing your risks that intentionally. Like, I mean, you are taking risks with lifestyle, but you just don't think about them.
I mean, even along those lines, like if you have a really long commute that you take every single day,
Totally.
Based on statistics, that's the exact same thing, because car accidents take more lives than most other things. And so it's one of those things where it's like, if you look at everything under a microscope in actuary and you expand it to a large, broad spectrum, especially things that are high risk or even things we consider normal that have a higher risk that we refuse to acknowledge in a lot of ways, you're going to run into that same issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting elements of rock climbing, and especially if you're like a full-time or professional rock climber. It's like a big part of your life is evaluating and managing risk, like thinking about risk, like taking something that could be or should be dangerous and trying to make it as safe as possible. And so, I mean, that's definitely the case with free soloing, but even just normal roped climbing, it's still inherently somewhat dangerous, and so you're always thinking about how to minimize that risk, minimize the danger as much as possible.
Do you think that's a big part of like picking the rock base too, especially when you're doing trad and things along those lines, is knowing where the holds are and making sure you understand? Because, I mean, a big part of rock climbing is self-awareness and knowing your capabilities and not going beyond them to a point where you're increasing your risk to an insane point, but also being able to push yourself to advance requires that ability to be like, okay, this is something that I've never really done before, but you take the safety precautions so that you're prepared.
Yeah, I mean, in order to improve, you try to push yourself to failure as much as possible. But then there's certain situations where if you fail, you'll die or you'll be severely injured. And so, yeah, as you said, there's a lot of self-knowledge involved. Like, you really have to know when you can push yourself, when you can't, when it's safe, when it's not. I mean, that's why so much of climbing is evaluating risk, like managing fear, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and my brother also does like backcountry, like avalanche zone kind of skiing stuff, and he does paragliding, which is his main passion now, and that's all he kind of talks about. And it's one of those things, because as I was watching Free Solo, I saw a lot of relatability in you and my brother, in the sense of like how you approach things and how you see things. And when you're super passionate about something, it's like you just keep after it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And so that was really unique for me from a personal experience to take away from that. Is in a way, I kind of saw and understand how my brother's brain works in a different, from seeing what you do and seeing the aspects of what he does, and being able to be like, oh, that's interesting, because it created that same kind of dynamic of the focus around passion. And so a lot of what he does obviously is evaluating risk. And also on top of that, like, it was showcased in the movie, but the amount of reps that you had spent on LCAP and the amount of mental reps with your notes and everything that you had, like, there's probably a much like broader amount of footage that was there to be able to make you feel comfortable and be ready and be prepared to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's all about the preparation. I mean, that's the thing. If you're trying to minimize risk, if you're trying to take something dangerous and make it feel comfortable, it's like preparation, training, visualization, any, whichever avenue you choose there. But there are only a handful of tools available to you, so you kind of have to use them all. It's like, I'm going to train physically, I'm going to train mentally, like I'm going to be absolutely ready to make sure that this thing that I want to do is as safe as possible when I do it.
Yeah, especially talking with your fellow climbers that had climbed El Cap multiple times and done different free solos in different areas and things like that. That was the part that I really took from it, is the amount of preparation that went into it and focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a common theme for the film. I think audiences this is what I was saying earlier, where nobody comes out of the movie being like, I want to go free soloing, but they come out of it thinking, if you want to do something hard, you should prepare for it, you should train for it, you should put the necessary time into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people ever emphasize mental reps enough, like visualization of what you're going to do in any discipline, because in sports, definitely, and you hear about like people that are like top level boxers, they're always like mentally going through their moves and responding like things, and I'm like being able to visualize the entire rock face not only reinforces it in your head. When I'm acting, I'm bad at memorizing things. Like, I'm bad with words and names that fall out of my head. But the only way that I've ever been able to memorize something is by visualizing myself acting out the scene in the beats that it needs to be, and then it's like instantaneous. Like, I can remember that even though it's a more complex thing, and it disciplines me and to prepare for it. It's like, as I was coming out of filming, I was mentally already editing it. I don't know if you've ever done any video editing. It's very, very boring for some people. I've loved it for some reason. But I was mentally editing it in my mind, stitching the shots together. And it's like that kind of mental preparation. People can put in the hours in like a gym or something, but if you're trying to play at the top level, you have to be like in it on whatever you're doing, and then off hours when your physical body is too tired, your brain is still going, and you need to keep thinking about it. And for me, sometimes I can't help but think about it. I have ADD, but that's just like, I got diagnosed way late, like when I was 21. But I don't think that that's any core feature of just that. I just about the things that I am obsessive about, even if ADHD, not ADHD, it is just a factor of like, when there's something you're passionate about, you can't help but think about it all the time. And that thinking about it is so integral to executing it when it's time to actually make it happen. So it's not really a question, it's more like a general statement.
No, I think that's particularly true, though, when you're doing things that are dangerous or things that you'll only do once. And so actually, when you said, boxers visualizing a fight, I mean, that's probably a good analogy with climbing or free solo climbing anyway, because realistically, you're only going to do the fight once. And so you want to be absolutely as prepared as possible before you do it. And so with free soloing, it's much the same. You can practice physically as long as you need, but you're only going to do the free solo once. And so visualization and sort of mental preparation is something that you can do sort of infinitely to prepare for that one time that you're actually going to do the real thing. And I mean, there are a lot of other things in life, like if you're trying to be a power lifter or something, like visualization probably doesn't matter quite as much, because you can just try the thing that you're trying over and over. Visualization probably matters a little bit to like break through mental hurdles and things, or like to break through mental blocks. But, if it's something that you can just try over and over, then, just go for it. But it's like, there's so many things in life where you're only going to get your one shot. It's like, you got to make sure that shot counts. And that's where the mental preparation really comes in.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the mind. Sorry, Tyler, I swear I'll let you talk.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I'm a huge believer in like the mind-body connection. I believe that they're integral. They're connected in ways that we can't ever like fully understand because a lot of it is just in the subconscious. But in that visualization, like especially even with powerlifters, I know that some powerlifters like they only lift once every 30 minutes because they give their body full rest. But it is such a intensely minute chain of muscle actions going from floor to above your head of like complete controls. Like if you didn't do the mental prep, like the power of the imagination and the ability to visualize these things is just like not leveraged in day-to-day things. There's been numerous cases of nonverbal like autistic children who never spoke a word in their entire childhood, and yet when they finally were able to speak at age like 6 or 7 or something like that, they were able to speak perfectly even though they'd never physically practiced it. And it's all because in their mind they were practicing it, and that practice was almost just as valid, and subconsciously moving muscles and like thinking about it had an impact on their ability to perform the action. And I think like when you get to that level, chess grandmasters, they visualize entire games. They have libraries of games in their head that they've practiced and rehearsed, and they're imagining new moves.
Yeah, I'm like, is that even visualizing? They're just playing the games in their head. You know, at that level, you're not even visualizing. You're not like imagining. You're just actually playing games. Like, can you imagine? It's like a whole different level.
God, if I was in a different discipline, like, I don't even know who I'd be.
Yeah.
I hope I could do it. I mean, maybe I'd fall on my face and fail. I'm lucky I'm at least somewhat decent at what I do, but yeah, no, it's really cool to think about.
This episode is brought to you by Vonage. Boosting more
Deliver yours.
Is there any particular rock face that you've like not been able to climb that you've really wanted to be able to do or are planning to do in the future?
No, I mean, they're almost limitless cool objectives around the world. I mean, there are tons of destinations and like incredible walls and inspiring mountains and faces and things. You know, there's a lot that I want to do.
Can you climb Mount Rushmore?
Really
That'd be
anything
cool.
that's gotten away. I don't know. There's this thing in Alaska that I did 2 expeditions. This place called the Ruth Gorge. It's kind of I don't know. It's just like a glacier that has a bunch of 5,000 foot rock and ice walls above it. You know, we kind of tried to climb. I don't know. They're basically the things I'd like to do in the world, but nothing. You know, like if I had to just hang up my hat and never climb again, I wouldn't feel like I'd missed out. You know, like I've gotten to do most of the things that I'm really excited about. At this point, I just, you know, carry on. You know, I just find like other cool things and like try other things that are challenging and like fun new projects. Yeah, I mean, like this summer I'll probably be going on this expedition to like several sort of new places for me, climbing some big walls in sort of the northern U.S., Canada, and Alaska. I'm sure it's all going to be amazing.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Is that kind of like why you went to Antarctica recently? Because I saw that you took that trip. How was that?
Yeah, actually, that was my first, sort of me dipping my toe into more high altitude mountaineering. I climbed the highest peak in Antarctica, which is kind of high, and then actually I went to Aconcagua, which is the highest peak in South America.
There are mountains in Antarctica?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Antarctica is actually really high. It's a really high elevation in general.
Whoa. And cold.
There's actually a lot of like decent rock in Antarctica too, just rock sticking straight out of ice. I've done 2 trips there. It's really cool.
I often forget that Antarctica is just a continent in and of itself, and that it's like massive. I just never think about it, but yeah, there's a mountain range, multiple mountain ranges in it. That's nuts.
Yeah, many very, very large mountain ranges. But yeah, that trip this winter was just my sort of little foray into checking out high altitude mountaineering. And my takeaway was that I wasn't into it, didn't like it, not doing any more of it. I was like, this is not for me. But which was good because it was just a 3 or 4 week trip, and it sort of reaffirmed what I want to do with my time in my life. You're always, and I feel like this is probably true in any discipline, but you're always kind of wondering like, oh, should I be doing something different? Should I be like taking on different challenges? Should I be aspiring to something new? And, basically I tried climbing big mountains, and I was like, you know what? I actually hate climbing big mountains. Like, I don't really like climbing ice and snow, but I love rock climbing. I was like, I'm just going to stick to doing the thing that I love doing.
Is that kind of like the what's next mentality that everybody kind of was like, oh, you did this, now what's next kind of thing?
I mean, probably a little bit of that, though. I've always, I'm a pretty well-rounded climber. I mean, I've done lots of expeditions, different places, and traveled widely. And like, I've put up roots on all 7 continents. It's like I've done a lot of climbing, and I've always been interested in all of it. But yeah, I mean, people are always like, what's the next big thing? And you're like, I don't know, what is the next big thing? And so you try a few things, and you're like, you know what? Don't care about those things. I'm going to focus on the things that I do really care about.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I tried music myself because it was like almost, I'm on YouTube, whatever. I was like, maybe I've always had this like desire like to do music, so I learned a few songs on guitar, played it during this live show that Tyler and I did. We also did improv on the show. I loved improv, hated performing music, but I did it, and I was like,
But
all
you
right,
were
never again. I put in all that work
beautiful.
to do that thing, and I'm like, all right, I'm good, and never doing that.
But I think that's just as important to learn. You're like, well, that's now off my life list. Like, never gonna waste any mental energy, like wondering if I should be working on something like that. Because you're like, you know what? I shouldn't be because I don't like it.
100%. Because in doing those new things, I did discover that I liked making larger productions. I had a opportunity with YouTube Originals to like make a bigger film project, and I was like, I've been dabbling in it, and I want to see what it's like working with a crew. And I've learned I kind of loved it. Parts of it, working with other people is difficult when you work so much on your own. But it was like there was something really nice about being able to make a bigger project. And anyone out there like who is I often encourage is like try new things, even if you're really good at something. Like try something new. I think it's that curiosity that drives people to explore, not only getting deeper in their own discipline that they're passionate about, but exploring what else they could be passionate about. It's very important.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things that as you develop and work on those, even if it's just to try it out, you get skills that potentially cross over into other aspects of life. And I was actually really curious about this because obviously I've done rock climbing throughout my life, not to the extent that you have. But I'm curious what kind of skills you've seen that have crossed over from like the focus, the endurance, every aspect of climbing that has become so ingrained in you into your like regular life.
Well, it's hard to say because climbing is so deeply ingrained. Like climbing is at the core of my whole life. So it's hard to know how much of my development as a person is because of climbing versus just general growing up and maturing and whatever else. But I do think that climbing helps put the rest of life in perspective. You know, like managing fear, managing risk, like struggling all the time, you know, having challenges. I just think that climbing, I think part of that is probably because so much time climbing is spent outdoors. And when you spend time in nature and in the elements, you just realize that a lot of things just don't matter that much. You know, it's like, I think about this all the time when I'm in airports, when I have to travel for work and things, and you see people like stressing, you know, like whether or not their flight's going to be delayed or whether they'll make their connection and whatever. And you're like, you know, you're going to be just fine. Like there's ample food and water around, you know, worst case scenario, you get put in a hotel for a night. Like, who cares? You know, like it's going to be just fine. Like either you're going to make the flight or you're not, but you stressing isn't going to change it one way or another. And either way, you're going to be comfortable. You're like, is that really something to worry about? And so I think climbing helps put those kinds of things in perspective. You know, and when people are like stressed about like weird mundane life stuff, like, oh, you know, like, is this paint the right color for my thing? You're like, who freaking cares? You know, like when you're dealing with sort of like mortal risk all the time, it just, you know, the rest of life just feels so chill.
It's one of those things that's like it's so easy to say, it's so hard for people to understand it. It's like you need constant reminders of that, like out there. I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly, and yet I still am like, man, yeah, no, I can't let the things that recently that have been bothering me distract me, because it's just like, yeah, no, in the long run, it doesn't matter. It'll get done, and that's almost always been my attitude.
I think being slightly afraid for your life from time to time is a really healthy and like sort of helpful outlook, because it makes the rest of life so. You know, it just puts it in perspective. You can be grateful for like the comforts of home and like the relative simplicity and ease of life. You know, because realistically, I mean, certainly, you know, us chatting here, it's like we're all going home to a comfy bed and like good food and like good community, and it's like it's a pretty freaking easy lifestyle. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you're in the developed world right now, like your life is pretty freaking chill. I mean, basically the most chill that any human's life has ever been in human history. You know, and yet it's easy to lose sight of that when you're like stressed about, you know, your work or whatever is going on. And so I think that climbing and specifically doing any sport that keeps you in the outdoors all the time just keeps you a little bit more in touch with you as a human animal, you know, where you're like, man, being in civilized society really makes life pretty comfortable compared to like being in the elements. And like, I don't know, like the last time I was climbing outside yesterday, we were up on this big mountain climbing these like really, it's sport climbing, so it's just single pitch climbs. It's just like 100-foot tall cliff, but way up on this mountain. And an afternoon thunderstorm rolled in. It was basically just pissing rain. And so for the time that we hiked down the mountain, it like felt all treacherous and rainy and kind of hardcore. And it's just a reminder that, you know, sometimes you're like, well, clouds build, it rains, you get wet, you get cold, you're uncomfortable, and like that's just the way life is sometimes. And I just think that when you live in a city or a sedentary lifestyle, you can just get too detached from that a little bit. Where you're like, oh, I just want things to be comfortable and easy at all times. And it's like you just need a little reminder that it's just not always easy. Like sometimes life's hard. It makes you appreciate the comfort more.
Is that part of the reason why you started your foundation and bringing like solar energy over to the underdeveloped areas and stuff like that? Is just that thought and that aspect that you've seen in like around the world as you've been climbing and then going and traveling and being like, why are people stressed about this when you know it'll be fine, and whereas other places they won't be?
No, that's exactly it. I mean, I started the Hono Foundation 10 years ago, and it supports community solar projects around the world, basically energy access projects abroad. It was largely that. I mean, sort of the injustice in life. I don't know. I mean, I kind of founded it because I was like, what's the inherent fairness of it? Like, there are a billion people living on Earth without access to energy and sort of living in poverty. Just by sheer good fortune, I was born in a place that I got to be a professional climber. I found this thing that I love to do. I've got to do it my whole career. I get to make a good living from just climbing on rocks. And I'm like, where's the karmic justice of like, that's so crazy, because you go on climbing expeditions and as a climber, when you go on an expedition, you go to the most remote parts of the world, and then you live there for quite long periods of time often. So you're like in some rural part of remote Africa living for a month in the middle of nowhere. And so you get to see, like rural villagers all over the world living in totally different ways. And you see their kids growing up, and you're kind of like, it's just a roll of the cosmic dice that these kids were born here and that I was born in suburban California. It's like there's no inherent fairness in that one way or another. I feel like so starting my foundation was just one way of trying to address that kind of inherent fairness.
I didn't even know about the foundation. I'll have to donate to it.
No, I appreciate it. HonoFoundation.org if you're curious. It was just my attempt at doing something useful. I mean, it's one of those things, if you spend all your time basically recreating outdoors and rock climbing, you are sort of like, should I be doing something a little better? Like, should I be trying to do something slightly helpful in the world? And so this was my attempt at trying to do something useful.
Along the same lines, is that kind of why you started being a part of the host of your climbing podcast? Like, to be able to give back to the climbing community that's given you so much?
Yeah, so my climbing podcast is Climbing Gold. It's so named because we started it before the Tokyo Olympics, which is the first time that climbing entered the Olympics. And so we felt like it was this interesting moment in climbing history where, climbing's like right on the cusp of going fully mainstream. And so we kind of wanted to explore a little bit where climbing had come from and where it was going at this interesting moment in climbing history. Now we're a couple seasons past that, and we're just exploring other interesting stories and interesting ideas within the climbing world. But it has actually been kind of fun to create something because, I've never done anything like that. I've never had like a body of work in some way. Because the thing with hard climbs is like you do a hard climb, maybe somebody films it, maybe somebody doesn't, but either way, it's just kind of immediately behind you, and people can't really like interact with it in any way. So Climbing Gold has been kind of a fun way of highlighting good climbing stories, but also sort of creating something for the climbing community.
That's really cool.
I'm just going to interject for 1 second. Everyone listening and watching this on Spotify, I just made a $1,000 donation to the Honold Foundation. If you need to make a donation, donate with me. HonoldFoundation.org.
I'm so touched. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, charity is a big thing, but for me and Tyler, like we're always doing like charity events, charity streams. He worked with Tiltify for a long time. He still like consults every once in a while, but just Tiltify is also a fundraising platform for stuff. So like we're big on charity. Like we're down to support anybody, and our fan base also is huge about like making contributions to this.
That's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we have the same kind of aspect as we're in a position where it's like we've been gifted so much in our lives, and there's so many ways that we want to be able to give back and help other people to advance their lives or be in a better situation or get to the point to where they can do things that they want to do. And so it's one of those things that it's always been a big aspect of since Mark started YouTube and since I've been around doing scouts and other stuff, is being able to give back and give people a better chance at an opportunities at life.
That is, to bring this back to climbing, I do think that that's a key thing from the climbing world is like, if you have enough, you don't need more. And it's like, and if you have something that you're already really passionate about, and you have enough and you're leading your life. I mean, and this is a big part of why I started the Hono Foundation is that, I have enough. I'm doing exactly what I want to do. I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I'm leading my best life. Anything else, I don't need. And so I can give that through the foundation to support, all kinds of useful projects around the world, basically support environmental projects, help the people that need it. To me, I feel like that should be a slightly more, like I wish that was more of the default.
Yeah.
It's like once you have enough, you call it good. It's like you just don't need more. Like you don't need the freaking mega yacht, like you don't need the private plane. It's like you're freaking fine. Like you're leading, like you're comfortable, you're doing the thing you love to do, call it good. Like, pass on the rest. Neither of you guys has a Meg-Y, right? I was just throwing that out there.
No.
Yeah, okay. just making sure.
But I love the climbing community because you go to a rock one, it's like, oh, I forgot this piece of gear. And it's like, oh, I got a spare one. Or, oh, yeah, like talking about the pitches and stuff. Like, everybody, like, unless you ask for it, they don't interject. And then if you end up in a situation like, oh, I spilled my water, somebody's there to offer water. And I've always loved that about the climbing community because it's like, oh, I got plenty. Yeah, I can help you out for that moment. Or
it's probably because every climber has always been in that position of need themselves. It's like, yeah, the community always helps people out because they've always been the one who's like, oh, it just started raining and I don't have a coat, or like I'm now freezing, or I forgot like a critical piece of gear or whatever. It's like I totally agree that someone's always got your back because everyone's always gone through the same thing themselves.
Yeah, and that's a great thing that the climbing community offers for any of you that are not sports people, which is the majority of people listening to the podcast. Like, that's why one of the big reasons why I love sport. There are people within different sects of sport that can be real dickheads. And I know it myself from playing football and other stuff. But there's communities, especially the climbing community, that are incredibly accepting, incredibly welcoming, and will be there to be like, yo, I can help you out if you need help, or be there for you if something happens. Like, it's truly an incredible experience where people can come together about something they're really passionate about and really inspire other people to do the same thing and be there for them if something goes wrong.
I actually think climbing is the sport for people that aren't into sport. I mean, that's how I wound up as a professional climber, is I'm terrible at balls and holes and sticks and like all the other weird team games. And, I lack the social skills to be on a team. I lacked the coordination to play any other sports, but, I'm athletic enough, it's like I can use my body. But I wanted to problem solve on my own. I wanted to set my own terms, kind of, like work on things at my own pace. It's like, climbing is definitely the sport for people that aren't into sport. It's like something really fun and engaging that you can do with your body, but you can do it in your own terms.
Perfect. Yeah, there's climbing gyms all over the place nowadays. Like, you probably have one in your city.
I'll check some. I think there was one
check it
for
out.
kids
They're very
near where I
friendly.
live,
Everyone
but I'll
I've been
check
to has
for
been
some
very
for
friendly, very
adults. I think there's one in
accommodating.
San
There's only
Francisco.
been one that there was
if
a
I'm not
guy who was a
mistaken.
dick, and honestly, he was even charming by himself. Like, there was something charming about him. But
I would say climbing is the best way to date if you're on the prowl. It's like you go dating at the climbing gym.
one of my girlfriend's friends is in a predicament because they've run out of guys to date at the same gym. I've heard. I probably can't talk about this, but I probably can't say anything about
Well,
this.
that just means she needs to move to greener pastures. She just needs to switch gyms for a little while, which in LA is tough because it's so hard to drive between them. But
Or just go to an actual rock face, you know?
Well, who are you gonna meet out there?
Tons of people.
handsome climbers.
All right, one last question before we sign off, because the name of the podcast is Go My Favorite Sports Team. Is there a sports team or sports person that either inspired you or you root for or always cheer for? You have friends, obviously, within the climbing space or anything like that, that, you know, you look up to or cheer for all the time or rooting for success for?
Short answer, no. I basically don't care about teams. So the thing I appreciate about mainstream sports, like playing with balls, is the athleticism and sort of the human potential. Like, basically I want to see human excellence. So I want to see great players achieve greatness. And so I never really care that much about teams unless that is the greatness. Like, I mean, because some teams work well because they're a really good team. Like, actually, a friend of mine was just explaining to me that because the NBA Finals is going on right now, that the Miami Heat or whatever isn't really like a superstar team, but they're just a great freaking team with great coaching. And I'm like, oh, I appreciate that when you can take a bunch of people who are undrafted and aren't necessarily the biggest talents in the league, but they can work well together and perform at a really high level. Like, I can appreciate that, but like, I don't freaking care about the Miami Heat. You know, it's like I just want to see people achieve excellence. Like, I mean, I think that the whole point of sport is to bring out the best in people, and so I like seeing great athletes perform at the top of their game. So, you know, I'd say I'm sort of a casual fan of like somebody like LeBron James, though he seems to not be achieving excellence right now. Exactly, or his team isn't. I'm not actually following but they're like down by a bunch right now. But in general, you know, it's like somebody who has spent 20 years in a league, always performing at a very high level and trying really hard, you know, like putting a lot in. Somebody like Kobe Bryant, where you're like, oh, he put his whole freaking life into excellence and really performed at that level. I mean, like, or freaking like Tom Brady in the NFL. Like, I'm not a huge football fan, but you just have to respect somebody who has achieved at that level You know, we're like,
That
oh,
is true.
and to play that long, you're like Jesus. You know, he's like a dinosaur.
You gotta have nothing but respect for Tom,
Tom Brady.
On this podcast, we have nothing but respect for
Re-
Tom
nothing
Brady.
but respect.
I respect Tom Brady. I just
Just don't like Tom Brady.
Don't listen to me. He does not like Tom Brady.
He loves Tom Brady.
Yeah, I know. Oh, man. He's always in my
I respect him. He's a great athlete. He's a great athlete.
He's just not
I
the
have
greatest
nothing
of all
against Tom Brady. I have stuff against how the media portrayed him and the greatest of all time conversation in team
here
sports
we
and
go.
stuff like that.
There we
He's a great athlete. I
go.
respect the hell out of it.
That's the thing is, I prefer to sidestep all those kinds of things. Where it's like, who's the greatest of all time? I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know any of the sports well enough. But most of the big names that sort of transcend sport like that, like, you know, Michael Jordan, LeBron, like whoever, like they transcend because they're among the best ever, and they've put a ton of work into it. And I think it's fair to say that they're all showing human potential in some way or another. Like, they're very freaking good at what they do. I don't know. So, I mean, that's what I appreciate about sports. But, like, I just don't get the tribalism of it, you know, where it's like, who cares if, like, your city... And I think it's so weird because none of the players are from the city anyway. It's like, you know, people are like, oh, it's our team. And you're like, but these are all people that are drafted from, like, abroad, you know, and, like, from wherever else. They're brought in from, like, literally the whole world. And then you claim that they represent your city, and you're like, they just don't. They're going to move as soon as they hit free agency or whatever. You're
That's
kinda like,
true.
come on. It's just a weird thing.
I'm in the same vein, but being on this podcast and learning from Tyler actually has kind of changed my perspective on it, because I do get people's natural inclination to want to feel included in something. There was a event, a boxing event, and I know it's not a team-based thing, called the Creator Clash that happened recently, where a bunch of YouTubers, they fought. And people who were not a big sports, it was for charity. It was
for charity. It was for charity. Alex, it was for
crap out of each
charity.
other.
Calm down.
People who watched that who never watched sports before were able to root for their favorite creator, and then they said afterwards, there was a few quotes, people quoted saying like, oh man, I get why people like sports now, because that was someone I cared about. Even if it was parasocial, it's someone they cared about and they can root for, and it feels good. And so I'm starting to understand where the team and city perspective comes from. It's like, you can feel pride, it's just like feels good to do for, but also it's a little nonsensical. But when you get into the deep weeds of it, it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I'm like, I get it, but I'm also just like, it's a little, I don't know. You know how some people like always root for the underdog? I'm like, I pretty much always root for the, what do you call it, the overdog. Like, basically, I want to see the best team win. You know, like, I like seeing teams go undefeated. Like, I like seeing greatness. Like, I like seeing excellence. And so people are like, oh, well, this team, you know, has such a long shot. Let's like root for them. I'm like, no, if they have a long shot, it's because they're not as good. You know, it's like, I want to see the best team win.
So you really were rooting against the Heat because they were the lowest seed when they faced the Bucks, who were the 1 seed in the first round of the playoffs.
No, I don't know any of it. But yeah, typically I root, like, basically my fan, or, you know, I root for the teams in order of their ranking. You know, like, I want to see the number one team win. It's always disappointing when the team that's number one in the regular season, like, doesn't make it to the finals or something. Because you're kind of like, come on, you won all those games and you couldn't take it to the end. Like, in the NHL this season, didn't that just happen with Boston or something? They, like, won a record number of games, and then they lost in, like, the first round of the playoffs or something.
I guess they weren't good enough.
I know, that stuff is, yeah, that stuff is tough.
I love this perspective. I'm not gonna lie, I love this perspective. I don't 100% fully agree with it, but I do also love it. Like, you fell on your face right at the finish line. Like, come on, man. Like, that, I do get it. That's why I love watching the Olympics. Like, Olympics is probably my favorite event to watch, is because it is like just that peak, and you get to see new things that I've never seen before.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the Olympics, it's like, basically I just want to see great human performance. Like, I want to be reminded that humans can do great things. And I feel like occasionally in mainstream sports you see that. Like, actually, so one of my favorite things now is just watching sports highlights on YouTube. Like, a couple times a year, I'll, like, go down some rabbit hole where I watch, like, the entire NFL playoffs in 10-minute YouTube clips. And so you're just seeing the best plays. You know, you're seeing a 3-hour game distilled down to 6 minutes of excellence. And I'm like, that is kind of my pace for watching sports, which makes me sound really dumb.
Not on this podcast.
Nope.
I'm all about that. Look,
I mean, the fact that you're watching it all.
I missed the Super Bowl, and our home city was in there, and I missed it. But I watched highlights of it afterwards. It was, and we still lost anyway. But you know, it was like, yeah, all right, cool. So we'll wrap it up. I could keep talking forever.
I was just gonna say, most climbers do not care at all about mainstream sports. I think more than most climbers, I care a little bit. partially because I'm a freaking professional athlete. I should at least have some idea what other professional athletes are doing. You know, even though it's like cross sport and whatever else. But like, I would say I'm interested. A lot of other, I mean, climbing has such deep countercultural type of roots that a lot of other full-time climbers are just like, F that, like, F the man, that stuff is stupid. You know, I'm like, I kind of agree with that, but I'm also like, you know, these people have still spent their entire lives devoted to, you know, honing their craft. And so I can still respect how well they do their craft. Like, that's my take on most sports.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Alex. I want to give you a chance to shout out where people can follow you and find you and support you. Obviously, the Honnold Foundation, you have your podcast, but anything else you want to say where they can follow you, find you, and see what you're up to?
Yeah, if they care about the work I'm doing at HonnoldFoundation.org, they can listen to the podcast at Climbing Gold. Or really, I mean, they can follow me on social stuff, just at Alex Honnold for everything. But, you know, I'd say a casual person should just watch the film Free Solo and be like, that's freaking crazy, and call it good. You know, it's like, unless you're into climbing, like, I don't need anyone to follow. I'm going climbing either way. You know, it's like, I'm not too stressed.
Yeah, it's like you said, it doesn't matter because you're having fun focusing on what you want to do, what other people think or what other people do. It's cool to see when they're striving for excellence, but outside of that, it's just not your thing.
All this stuff aside, I'm going climbing tomorrow. Hopefully going to send my project. That's what I care about. You know, it's like, that's the important thing, is like, I want to do the thing that I'm trying to do.
And honestly, that's why it's inspiring.
Well, I appreciate it. No, it's a pleasure chatting with you guys. It's been super fun.
Yeah. Did we end up asking any questions that you didn't expect or threw you off that nobody else has asked?
Well, I don't know. I'd say that we went down a much, like a whole different path than I expected. You know, sort of the existential side of climbing. It's like, I was expecting more nuts and bolts, like, how do you train? What's your diet? Like, that kind of stuff. This is more like...
Not on this podcast.
And what is your purpose?
I love asking those questions. I love doing that. No, I hope you had fun. Seriously, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you. And good best of luck on all your future climbing endeavors.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure sharing, and yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, well,
Thank you very much.
thank you again. And for those watching, we'll catch you in the next episode. And you know where to go and where to find us. So follow us on Spotify if you want to watch video exclusively and check out, you know, the merch and other stuff we have going on.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thanks
Bye,
so much,
Alex.
Alex.
Thank you very much.
That was very interesting. I didn't know climbing had that sort of existential crisis of like climbing, whatever, doesn't matter. But I like his like little saying like just do what you want to do and of like what you're good at, and if you really want to like if you would die for that or whatever he said, like just do that for the rest of the life that you would die happy for. That's exactly what I want to do with childcare or architecture or anything designing wise, because I love kids. I love playing with kids. I love being a kid when I have the mental space in place to do so. I love architecture just on the designing point, the structural point of putting things together. I love Legos, for crying out loud. I love constructing them and seeing them in their beauty once they're done. I have the frickin' Empire State Building. Do you know how hard that was to build? Not hard at all, because I had instructions. But if I didn't, boy, would that be hard. But I built it, and I built BD1 and Spider-Man and M.A.D.D.Y and a bunch of other things that are in this chest right here. You know? And I love doing that. If I could build Legos for a job, I would do that, and I would die happy. Lego, look at me. Look at the case I have of Legos. That's how much I love you guys, and that's how much I would want that job. If you want a person who can follow the instructions to the T and make these awesome Lego projects to like put up in your store or whatever, contact me. Come on, because I would love that. That would be my dream job. If not for architecture or something in childcare, building Legos for a living would be amazing. You know? It would just be amazing. But like, yeah, stuff like that too. Because my mom was actually like proposing this business opportunity to maybe kind of do of owning my own daycare near where I live, and like just renting a place that's for lease and just making a daycare accessible for not only like kids big and small, but also kids with learning disabilities or disabilities in general, and just combining them together. My experience with kids, my dad's experience with special needs kids, we just put them together in one daycare, and it would be fun and it would be engaging. And you know, I was like I'm literally doing concept art of, I'm like taking pictures of any leased buildings near my neighborhood. I'm taking pictures of it, and I'm doing concept art of what the place would be called, what the design of the label would be called, and stuff like that. And like, I'm doing legit concept work on a project that's not probably gonna happen. And I'm just excited to even look for places near where I live to even start that. And like, I'm currently doing a job in a movie theater that's like 30 minutes driving, by the way, driving an hour, boarding there, and I'm freaking putting popcorn into buckets. The work I'm doing now isn't helping me build a work that I want to be doing. Like, the money, yes, it helps, but like, money can only get me so far, and the rate that I'm doing it is not working. It's just not working. So I'm gonna go. But yeah, that was very interesting of how he was talking about climbing and stuff like that. My question is like, he said he has a kid. Is he gonna make his kid start to climb like he did, or is he gonna let his kid do his own thing? That's just my question for him to answer. But he's probably never gonna answer that. But yeah, donate to his foundation. That sounds really cool. I did not know that, and I knew about the movie Free Solo, but I didn't know it was like a documentary. I knew it was like a movie that came out and won the Oscar. I'm like, cool, that's awesome. But I never actually like reacted to it. If you guys want me to react to it, let me know. I can totally do that. I just gotta find it. But yeah, I'm gonna go eat now. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. It's been M.A.D.D.Y. I don't know.